Hello and welcome to Sepsis Voices with Dr. Ron, that's me, a brand new podcast from the UK Sepsis Trust. I'm Dr. Ron Daniels and I founded the charity in 2012. And in this podcast series, I'll be talking about sepsis, talking about infection management with an array of guests from the realm of healthcare and beyond. And it's beyond that we're venturing into today. Our aim is to educate people about sepsis and infection management and to provoke further debate about key issues such as AMR or antimicrobial resistance. But for our first episode, we're thrilled to be joined by BAFTA award-winning actor and UK Sepsis Trust ambassador Jason Watkins, whom you might recognise from The Catch or Line of Duty or pretty much every time you turn the television on. We're going to be discussing Jason's personal connection to our charity and to talk about an upcoming ITV documentary that he's made with his wife, Clara. So let's get stuck in. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jason.
Thank you. Very, very nice to be here, Ron, and nice to be from, what did you say, the other side? Or something. I quite like that. I might actually nick that.
Yeah, well, the non-healthcare side, but
Yeah.
absolutely, you can have that. So, Jason, obviously, you've got a very personal backstory here. Could you sort of outline how you became involved with the UK Sepsis Trust and perhaps how we first came to your attention?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that you say in your preamble there that, we started the trust in 2012. Well, we lost our daughter Maude to sepsis in the New Year's Day 2011. So there is an obvious connection there between us. Maudie got a cold that went to her chest, and I thought that was worrying for us, and so we took her to a GP. We were then referred down to the drop-in A&E department, a local hospital, where she was discharged later that day after having some minor sort of treatment, and were given some steroids, particularly for the constriction that was happening in her throat. And then her condition worsened the next day, 24 hours later. So we did the same thing, took her to hospital the next day, which was New Year's Eve. And then despite sort of her coming down, having gas and air and some antibiotics and more steroids, although her temperature was falling, the consultant in charge, the paediatric consultant, suggested that it'd be okay to go home. Although that felt uncomfortable, the condition was improving, so-called, because of the temperature change. And so you take your advice from your medical people and off you go. So we took her home, and tragically, she died in the night, and we found her on New Year's Day, so in her cot. So, yeah, I'm all too familiar with the rigors of sepsis. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that just brings out so many questions, but just to focus for a moment for the listeners on the unimaginable pain and trauma of finding your child deceased in their cot when you'd put your faith in the health professionals and you had taken their advice and you'd done everything you could, and you'd gone back and you'd asked questions and you've been reassured by them. I think for anyone listening to this, that is, or for the vast majority, thankfully, unimaginable. But looking back, and that was now 12 years ago, what did you know about sepsis or the risks of infection to children as a parent at that time 12 years ago?
I knew virtually nothing. One imagines that there's these sort of nasty things that happen, and there are unexplained deaths, and there are, almost in a Victorian sense, where a number of children will die in childhood and there's nothing anyone can do about it. And one feels that I was kind of in that world, really. So I didn't know the difference between septicemia and sepsis. I didn't know what sepsis was. I didn't, I think I'd heard of asepsis, but to me it was to do with poisoning, and one should look out for what perceived more dangerous things, And so I had really very, very little knowledge of it. And nothing like, I mean, I've probably got 100% more knowledge of it now than I did when Maude passed away.
Of course, and hindsight is, well, not quite a wonderful thing here, but an important thing. And yet this sort of language issue that we have, and we know that to this day, some of those championing better outcomes from meningitis still use the word septicemia. Yet in adult medicine, we've dropped the term septicemia and we use the term sepsis. And I just want to explain to non-medical listeners that they are the same thing. Sepsis is the currently used term. Septicemia is a more historical term now, and but I think this language and the variations in language do create a degree of confusion. If there had been a sort of sepsis awareness initiative out there at the time, do you think it would have broken through the noise for you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I hope that's what we're doing, and it's certainly, we know, don't we? Because we have people contact us all the time, and myself included, around not long after that, I was talking on TV about it, and I'm fortunate enough, but because of my acting profile, I'm able to, connect with parents and people and talk on the news and all that kind of stuff, as I know you do. But yes, there was a woman whose friend, her child was ill, and she thought something was wrong, and at the hospital recommended that she go to the hospital, and indeed the child was treated for sepsis and pulled through. And there are other, and it's one of many. And even now, I'm talking to somebody on Friday, a friend of mine. He lost his son, 1-year-old, I believe, and to sepsis, last week. So it is so prevalent, and you know the numbers. 245,000 cases per year is extraordinary. To answer your question, I hope I would have been able to break through the noise and to try and, because I think it's a simple thing, isn't it? I mean, it's great that septicemia and sepsis are the same thing. Any simplification can make it simple for a parent to go, just simply to say, okay, my child has had an infection, or an infection is involved in some way in their illness, that you can then ask, well, can you rule out sepsis for me, please, before you do anything else? And that's what I hope we're trying to do, isn't it? And I wish that had been around at the time, let alone not even having the word as currency. The word wasn't currency.
No, absolutely, and I would imagine that if you could sort of find a time machine, maybe that's a program you've not been involved in as yet, but find a time machine, go back in time 12 years. Is that the one thing you'd tell yourself, to just ask that question?
With my knowledge now, I would. Yeah, I mean, I wish I'd, read more H.G. Wells, and got my little time machine. That is the question, isn't it? And that's the question now one would ask. But it's even now it's difficult, isn't it? Because we know with our own children that can I be completely honest and say that every time my child's been ill and has got a cold or something a bit stronger, or even because during the pandemic, where my younger two children both had COVID, was I really covering all those bases in terms of sepsis? I was thinking it's definitely COVID. It's a cold. It's a heavy cold. It's still a very difficult area for parents, and also it's not always the parent's responsibility, is it? That's the thing. If you have a Ferrari, I mean, every child is a Ferrari, aren't they? They're a beautifully crafted, amazing machine to their parents, but you wouldn't in a million years ask a layman to fix a Ferrari. You take it to the garage, you can take it to the hospital, and there's only so many. What you can say is this is an awful Alan Partridge analogy, but you're going, the car's not, doesn't feel right, something's wrong with it. My child is, I know her, I know him, I know her, and there's something that is not like when they were ill before. There's something else going on, and even if you don't know the symptoms of sepsis, trust your instinct is what I would say, and that's something that we do more of now. But of course, in infants, it's difficult in infants because it may be the first time your child's been ill.
I don't know whether you agree that that has to be the single most important message for any parent listening, as well as anyone who's advocating for an adult who may or may not have sepsis. It's trust your instinct, because you know that individual, that little person or full-sized person, better than any health professional. And yes, we have to hope and expect that the health professionals are well trained and are going to be alert to the dangers of sepsis. But it's about partnership. It's about communicating. Look, in your case, my daughter has had coughs and colds before, but I've never seen her this unwell. And I think she's getting worse, not better. It's that instinct driven, almost assertiveness that I think is important.
Yeah, it is. And also, we, as part of the documentary, which I know we'll probably talk about later on, going to King's College Hospital in London and witnessing the SIMS program, where there's a simulated infant being programmed with various illnesses, and the team there were excellent in spotting the sepsis. But as part of that, there was a parent who's one of the consultants was pretending to be a parent. Well, she's a parent herself, but she was pretending in this instance to be one within the program. And it's an important ingredient of that you allow the space for that parent to be able to speak and to be heard and listened. That's all part of it. But yeah, you've always got to say, allow the parent to voice their opinions and not preempt anything that they may say. I suppose you'll know better than I do, and a lot of the listeners will. That it's sort of I'm not going to get the term right, but there's a false bias, isn't there, that you think that it's one thing when actually it isn't. And if you jump too quickly on your presumption, you may rule out the very thing that is actually happening. And that is absolutely key with sepsis, isn't it, Ron? That you jump at some conclusion when sepsis is lurking underneath.
Yeah, and I think it's also important that we acknowledge that a child with a feverish illness is a very common occurrence, and of course the vast majority of them have a fairly minor self-limiting illness that certainly doesn't need antibiotics, let alone hospital assessment. But it is just health professionals think, how can I be alert to that needle in the haystack that is the genuinely ill child? But I think my message is, not only a dad, but also someone who's spent a lot of time with families who've gone through grief, is to those health professionals. The vast majority of families don't want to be taking their child to hospital. They don't want to be perceived a nuisance. They find it inconvenient and frightening for their child. And the vast majority of parents wouldn't put that child in that situation unless they were really concerned. And I think health professionals need to really understand that, rather than thinking that every parent is, a worrier.
Yeah, that's right. And, it's so hard because there's so much pressure on the health service, obviously, and obviously on GPs. It's very difficult for us to get an appointment at our GP at the moment. Our local GP, it's you can tell it's really underfunded. People are ill, of course. There are absences, etc. So it's very pushed. So the idea of a parent coming in and spending longer than supposedly they should, or whatever, talking about the concerns they have about their child, it's a difficult thing, because obviously GPs and junior consultants, etc., and everybody has a schedule. There are things to do, but it's just allowing that, particularly with infants, that that process to play out, and that they're able to voice their concerns and worries, and that they should be listened to. But I understand the strains and difficulties of that.
So, Jason, just moving on, because we need to come to talk about the upcoming documentary. But just before we do that, I just sort of wondered if you had any reflections, because in your recent role in The Catch, of course, you played a dad grieving for the loss of his son. And it's one thing talking about your own lived experience and your own tragedy, but does that make acting in that role more natural, less natural, more difficult, less difficult?
All of those things, really. It makes all of those things, and you know where you're heading when you take on something like that. And I knew that I was going to be, it was one of the reasons to be fearful of doing it and one of the reasons to be doing it. You know, it's, you know, without trying to be convenient, or I've done lots of interviews about the catch and talked a lot about this. And it's interesting to reflect now as I've come through the publicity shoot of it. You know, there's hundreds of interviews really, and it's done very well, which is very satisfying. I'm not just plugging myself, there's some very big numbers for Channel 5, which means a lot of people have watched it. You know, so that's really good. So lots of people are aware of grief and how parents behave. And, you know, I was, and I am like the characters. So answering your question, you know, it is difficult to take those things on, but I wanted to play in it. I wanted to be in a thriller. I love thrillers. And this is psychological thriller and drama. And it's nice to be in the middle of it. I usually play the weirdo on the edge, some sort of crazy fool, you know, some dreadful psychological concoctions. But it was nice just to play something closer to me. But obviously the character played does become quite extreme in his behaviour, because he's hanging on, you know, as a parent. When you've lost a child, your judgment is different, and you are hanging on. And, you know, while we just think about it, you know, if as a healthcare professional you meet a parent who's lost a child, you've got to really, it's a difficult, you know, it's a particular thing. They're obviously worried more than they would. I do. I'm in our family. My wife is better at containing her worries. I'm not so good. And I'm very worried, and it's difficult. You know, I would hope to be listened to, but also reassured. And given a bit of science is a good thing about numbers, and, you know, possibilities and probabilities. But in the catch, Ed, he doesn't quite have his cognitive ability, I think, has been dented and changed, and emotionally he's in a bit of trouble. And then all these incredible things start happening. His natural overprotectiveness to his daughter leaves him open to a very difficult journey, which hopefully I take the audience with me on. So, yeah, but it was difficult doing certain scenes of, you know, CPR, which I did, you know, which I performed on my own daughter. So, you know, I knew that I was heading that way. And one moment I was thinking, well, maybe should we not do this? But then, you know, we paired down the set. There was just me and the cameraman. And that was it. Everyone else was about 40 yards away. So, you know, so I was able just to do it and then have a big hug and then carry on with the next sort of more fishy scene.
Of course, a well-deserved hug. So, onto the nitty-gritty. You know, the documentary is called Jason and Clara in Memory of Maudie, and we know it's going to be broadcast on ITV1 on Thursday, the 30th of March this year at 9 p.m. So, what do our listeners need to know about this upcoming documentary, other than to have a box of tissues very firmly to hand?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be difficult. You know, it is. I mean, this sounds, just thinking off the top of my head, this sounds a really strange way of looking at it. But I would ask you to think, you know, every time I find this, every time I go to a funeral, I find it very difficult, and I cry a lot. I always associate my daughter's loss, and I'm an emotional person anyway. But then I always think, when I meet people I may not have seen for a long time, or people I do know very well, I always come out wanting to make sure I make the most of my life and connect with people and do the best for myself and my children and my family and my friends. And, you know, and that burns brightly a bit, and then we get sucked into things. But I hope that I remember a bit of that as I go through. And I think the documentary is in that world. We are talking openly about our grief and our sharing memories of our daughter with the public. And so I think this documentary is from that arena, that world. And that sounds very down and depressing, doesn't it? But it's the life affirming bit that I'm also talking about connecting, talking to people, sharing information. And in that context, it would be memories and the joy of that person who's gone. and we are doing that in our program, of course. But, you know, we're sharing what happened to Maude, what she was like as a person, how our family is coping, meeting parents that we've met and the groups that we've met. And you know, I'm hooking up with a couple of parents that I've met on Twitter that I haven't met in the flesh. So you'll see all that. And you'll also see, you know, Clara and I, you know, talking about Maude and about what she meant to us, and how we have different ways of grieving and similarities in grieving. And also sharing, you know, our wonderful friends, what they did for us. But it also gives an audience idea of what sepsis is, and it gives this about all the things we've been talking about, Ron, and about, you know, asking could it be sepsis, and better awareness, I suppose, is what the documentary is giving in terms of sepsis to parents and, you know, also to healthcare professionals. But this is something I'm sure they know more about. I go to King's and I meet Akash there, who is a consultant and who runs this training program there. I won't spoil that, but that's very moving in itself. And then, you know, we go to other places and meet other people, but it's also about grieving and the grieving process within families and how one copes and doesn't cope, and the need to share and talk and express your feelings in the stories of your child and your lives with other similarly affected and bereaved parents themselves. And then this idea and this feeling, which is very real, that you can go on, you can continue. This is the conversation I'm going to have with this guy on Friday. You know, I'm going to be telling him that I won't need to tell him how he's feeling at the moment, a few weeks in, but I will tell him that those things, physical things, the trauma of what one has suffered, do subside slightly, and it becomes different, and you're able to go on and cope. And I think that's the message of the documentary, is to reassure and give comfort to other families and give the general population an idea of maybe a way of helping someone that they know who's bereaved, and not feel fearful of approaching a mother who's lost their child, because it's very different to think, oh God, I'm going to say something really stupid. And you might do, but it's better to acknowledge the child than not. That's the key. But I think audiences will be affected by it. I really hope so, and that it serves some good for more.
Yeah, that last point's really interesting. I was walking through London with Melissa Mead, whom you know, the other day, and she was telling how Arthur, her older child, was asked by an elderly lady in the street, you know, do you have any brothers or sisters? And he says, well, I do have a younger brother, but he's dead. And that lady didn't know what to say. And I think we recognize that death is a part of life. It shouldn't happen to children, but we do need to normalize talking about it, of course.
We do. And that's great, isn't it, Arthur, to say that.
Yeah, it really is incredible. You know, what a grown-up young man, and how mature. And I think it's important we acknowledge at this point that you do provide brilliant support and raise awareness around our charity, UK Sepsis Trust, but also another brilliant charity, Child Bereavement UK. So I guess sort of brief, how important do you think for people like you and for broader society is the support of, we all know that the support should come from a central pot, but it doesn't. How important do you think is the role of the charitable sector in this space?
Well, it's in the charitable sector, and it's vital, isn't it? It does provide those, you know, it caters for people's altruism and their kindness in a very direct way, charitable. And there's a whole other conversation about state support. And we sadly, when Maude died, Clara started seeing somebody. I should have done, really, of course, but then that service was withdrawn because it was run out of funding. So that's really hard. And I might have been lucky to have bereavement counselling, could have afforded it. And I suppose, having had a bit of counselling along the way since Maude died, it is at the root of it is Maude's loss. So other people are less fortunate. So so that is why the state, I hope more will come from the state, but absolutely in the charitable sector, it is a very direct way, because you can, if you feel empathy, you can give immediately. And if you're a great charity, like the two charities that I chiefly work for, they are available and there for you. You just reach out and they're there, and it's very direct, and it is free because of the wonderful gifts that so many of the people that we know and got to know very well over the years have helped with that. And in terms of bereavement, child bereavement, it is essential that you talk to people, and that you're able to find that person that you can share things with. It's the idea of not being able to share one's feelings about loss in this context, it's just, and that can happen because, particularly amongst men, and that touches upon this in the documentary, that I felt I just needed to cope when Maude died and carry my family with me. I was sort of born again kind of father. And of course, it's not as simple as that. It's complicated. And a lot of that complication is healed by just being able to talk to somebody. So, on the other end of things, which is what Child Bereavement UK do so well, is listen, providing a space to listen, and support, and it's techniques and ways and things to think about, reassurance. So all those things, and UK Sepsis Trust similarly, we have great supporters, and they have made such an enormous difference, and it is a direct, visible difference to to outcomes and to society in general. So my hope is that we get a good mixture of the two. I don't think I don't believe that. I believe that the state should contribute more, and I know that that's just my view, but I always know that it's going to be a hybrid of the state support and us being seen to be supporting ourselves as a society within the political system, but also to embrace the incredible energies and resources that the charitable sector has done and has had to do in the last few years.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And just to reinforce the point for listeners that we are both charities. We have people who listen. We have people trained in bereavement counselling. We connect people with other people who've been through it, as you wonderfully do for us, Jason. But really important to reinforce that charities like ours can't do this without help from people like our listeners, without donations.
I remember we've said this many times when we've had meetings, haven't we, with people, that we know that with that support, with donations, and what that brings, that you can see numbers fall. You can see lives being saved, particularly in the sphere of sepsis, and acknowledging and recognizing sepsis earlier does save the life. So a contribution it has a direct impact.
It absolutely does. Jason, we could talk for hours, but I just really wanted to thank you personally for speaking to me and speaking to our listeners today, and of course for your ongoing work as an ambassador for the charity. We really look forward to the documentary and supporting its launch and watching it, of course, and helping to make more people aware of this life-threatening condition. So join us for our next episode of Sepsis Voices with Dr. Ron, that's me, where we will be talking about post-sepsis syndrome and recovery from sepsis. Please do head to our website at sepsistrust.org for more information about our charity in the meantime, or indeed to support us with a mission. Jason, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ron.